It was a clear, sunny December 4th when Nathaniel Masahi Takatsuno, a 22-year-old lab technician from the University of California, San Diego, set out to climb the wedge at El Cajon mountain. Known for its steep granite faces and popular multi-pitch routes, the wedge had long attracted climbers seeking a challenge. That day, Nate chose to free solo Leonides, a demanding 3-pitch 5.9 route, a decision that would tragically end his life. At the base of the crag, climber Michael Sandler and his partner were preparing for their own climb when Nate passed by, rope slung over his back. He seemed calm, casually mentioning that he intended to solo Meteor, a nearby 5.8 route, and use the rope only for rappelling down. Sandler, noticing Nate was alone and without a helmet, struck up a conversation. "Do you just not have any friends who wanted to climb?" he asked, trying to gauge Nate's reasoning. Nate smiled and replied that he had friends but enjoyed the solitude and challenge of soloing. Moments later, Nate began his ascent, but Sandler and his partner noticed something unsettling right away. Nate had veered off Meteor and was now climbing Leonids, the slightly harder 5.9 route. From the ground, Sandler could see Nate struggling as early as the third bolt, appearing gripped and uneasy. He used minimal gear, occasionally grabbing bolts to steady himself, a red flag for anyone familiar with the dangers of free soloing. As Nate climbed higher, each move seemed more labored, his hands grasping at the warm granite, sweat mixing with chalk as he tried to maintain a steady grip. The sun was now directly overhead, intensifying the heat radiating off the south-facing wall. The rock, already polished in places from frequent use, felt slick under his fingertips. Every foothold required precision, but Nate's footing grew increasingly unstable, and his body language betrayed a growing sense of unease. As he ascended, he passed another climbing party who were rappelling down. They exchanged brief pleasantries, quick, casual words that belied the danger Nate was in. One climber asked, "You doing all right up there?" Nate managed a breathless, "Yeah, just taking it slow," though his trembling legs and frequent reliance on bolts for balance told a different story. The rappelling climbers noticed him grabbing bolts, not just brushing them for stability, but clutching them, using them as anchors in moments of panic. His fingers lingered on the cold metal longer than they should have, a silent admission that he was nearing his limits. Then, it happened. Perhaps it was a slip on a dusty foothold, a sudden crumbling of a microflake beneath his shoe, or a desperate lunge for a hold that wasn't quite there. But in that moment, Nate's balance shifted. His left foot skated off the granite, his body lunging forward instinctively to compensate. His hands scrambled for purchase, fingertips grazing the rock, nails scraping as he tried to claw back control. For a fleeting second, it seemed like he might recover, a frantic grasp at a nearby flake, but the rock crumbled beneath his grip, sending fragments scattering into the void. Gravity took hold. Nate's body pitched forward, his chest slamming into the wall before bouncing outward into open space. Arms flailed, legs kicked, but there was nothing to grab onto. No rope, no holds, only air. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged, the sheer terror freezing the scream in his throat. Down below, Michael Sandler was leading the first pitch of his own route when he felt it. A soft, almost imperceptible thud reverberating through the wall, followed by a sudden gust of wind that rustled his clothing. Confused, he glanced upward. That's when he saw Nate. The sight was surreal. Nate's body hurtling through the air, limbs splayed out, twisting uncontrollably as gravity dragged him down. His arms reached out as if trying to grab onto invisible holds, his fingers spread wide in desperation. His face, pale and contorted in sheer terror, locked eyes with Sandler for a fraction of a second, a haunting moment that would replay in Sandler's mind for days to come. Nate's body plummeted past Sandler, missing him by less than 5 feet. The force of his fall sent a gust of wind strong enough to whip Sandler's shirt against his chest. Then came the impact. A bone-shattering thud echoed across the crag as Nate's body struck the ground below. The sound reverberated through Sandler's chest. But it didn't end there. Nate's momentum carried him forward, his body rolling uncontrollably down the steep hillside. Dust and debris billowed into the air as his form tumbled over rocks and brush, eventually coming to a rest. Panic and urgency overtook Sandler and the other climbers nearby. Sandler immediately called out to his partner Andrew, telling him to tie off the belay so he could safely assess the situation. Another climber from a separate party, trained as a wilderness first responder, scrambled down the hillside to reach Nate. 911 was dialed within moments, and for the next 40 minutes, Sandler and others remained on the phone, relaying information to emergency services while trying to stabilize the scene. It took nearly 45 minutes for rescue helicopters to arrive. A paramedic was lowered onto the steep slope, quickly assessing Nate's condition. Sadly, it was clear. There was nothing more that could be done. The paramedic collected details from the witnesses before being airlifted out, leaving Nate's body behind due to the difficult terrain and fading daylight. Sandler and the others felt a strong responsibility to help the rescue teams locate Nate's body the following day. Understanding how easily someone could get lost on the steep hillside, they marked the location with climbing tape before finally leaving the scene, the weight of what had happened heavy on their shoulders. While Nathaniel Takatsuno's tragic fall highlights the dangers of free soloing and the unforgiving nature of unroped climbing, our next story takes us to the rugged peaks of Grand Teton National Park, where a group of climbers, misled by inaccurate information, found themselves in a situation far more dangerous than they had anticipated. On August 10, 2023, a group of 9 climbers set out with high hopes to ascend the east face of Tewanot Mountain in Grand Teton National Park. Towering at 12,325 feet, Tewanot is known for its jagged ridges and technical terrain, especially along the east face, a route graded as low 5th class, a climb demanding careful navigation, respect for exposure, and proper gear. Among the climbers that day was Joe Cho, a 47-year-old from Simi Valley, California, whose love for the outdoors had brought her to this iconic peak. The team, however, made their first crucial mistake before even starting the climb. They began their ascent in the afternoon, well past the typical start time for such an undertaking. As they made their way upward, they encountered an NPS volunteer descending the peak around 2 p.m. The volunteer immediately noticed the group's late start and the glaring absence of essential climbing equipment. No helmets, ropes, or harnesses. The climbers, however, seemed unfazed. "Hey, it's getting pretty late for an ascent," the volunteer warned, glancing at their gear. "Most people are already on their way down. You sure you want to keep going?" One of the climbers responded confidently. "We checked a hiking app. It's listed as a hike, nothing too technical." But that was the second mistake. The east face is no simple hike. It's a low 5th class climb with exposed ledges and loose rock, requiring caution and, ideally, protection. Yet, relying on inaccurate information from a popular hiking app, the group pressed on, unaware of the full dangers ahead. As the climbers continued upward, the hours passed quickly, and the sun began its slow descent behind the peaks. With a group of 9, progress was sluggish. Rest breaks became frequent, and the decision-making process stretched on longer than expected, a common issue with larger teams in technical terrain. Joe Cho, enthusiastic but cautious, found herself mid-group, carefully navigating the increasingly exposed sections. The rock beneath her feet felt gritty but unstable in places. Without ropes or helmets, every step required extra care, but there was an underlying sense of confidence among the climbers. After all, it was just a hike, right? As they neared the summit, the exposure became intense. Jagged ridges jutted out, and narrow ledges offered little margin for error. Joe reached a particularly tricky section, a narrow shelf that hugged the side of a sheer cliff. To her right, the mountain dropped away sharply, revealing the valley floor nearly 1,000 feet below. She moved slowly, choosing her holds carefully. Then came the moment that would change everything. Joe was edging her way across a narrow ledge when she reached for a protruding rock for balance. Her left foot, resting on a small outcrop, began to shift, ever so slightly. A tiny crack echoed through the silent air as the rock beneath her gave way, crumbling beneath her boot. She lunged forward, arms outstretched, desperately trying to grasp another handhold, but her momentum had already shifted backward. Her fingers grazed the edge of a flake, nails scratching against stone, but it broke off under the force. Her feet skidded against the rock face as gravity took over. For a split second, she hovered between safety and disaster, but then her body pitched backward into the void. The other climbers could only watch in helpless horror as Joe Cho began to fall. Her body tumbled, bouncing off the rock wall, hitting ledges and outcrops as she plummeted downward. Dust and debris followed her descent, cascading in a trail behind her. The sound of her body striking the rock echoed up the mountain, dull, sickening thuds, each one hammering home the grim reality of the situation. She fell approximately 150 feet before coming to a stop on a lower ledge, motionless. For a few seconds, there was only stunned silence. Nobody could believe what had just happened. Panic quickly set in among the climbers. Shouts echoed through the air, names called out in desperation. One climber rushed to the edge, trying to spot Joe's body below. Another fumbled with their phone. Miraculously, they had cell service. The call to NPS personnel was logged at 7:30 p.m., but daylight was rapidly fading. A helicopter reconnaissance was attempted, but quickly called off due to the deteriorating light and the technical terrain. With no other options, a ground team of 4 expert climbing rangers was dispatched at 10:30 p.m. They trekked through the dark, navigating treacherous ground with headlamps, reaching the stranded climbers at 2:15 a.m. The group had been forced to wait in the cold, mountain air, huddled together, grief-stricken and shaken by what they had witnessed. By morning, with daylight restored, 3 helicopter shuttles transported the survivors and rescuers back to the valley. A specialized short-haul operation was used to retrieve Joe Cho's body from the ledge where she had fallen.